Ukraine and Russia accused each other of overnight air attacks on their border regions. A Russian airstrike on the Ukrainian border city of Sumy killed 2 people and injured several others early on Sunday. Sumy lies just across the border from Russia's Kursk region, where Kyiv launched a shock offensive last month aiming to create a buffer zone inside Russia. Meanwhile, regional authorities have urged people in 183 Sumy settlements near the Russian border to evacuate, and that thousands of others in the area had already done so. While Russia claimed that 3 civilians, including 2 children, were injured in Ukraine's air attack in its southwestern region of Belgorod. Both Sumy and Belgorod regions have been subject to frequent attacks. Both sides deny targeting civilians, saying the attacks are aimed at destroying each other's infrastructure critical to war efforts. An Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on the sidelines of annual Tehran Business Forum on Saturday. Meloni pledged unwavering support for Ukraine, in which they discussed Kyiv's plans to end the conflict with Russia and reconstruction efforts. Meloni said Italy would never backtrack on its support for Ukraine, and the choice of supporting Ukraine will not change. After holding talks with Zelensky, Meloni underlined India's key role in resolving tensions between Russia and Ukraine. Meloni's statement comes as Russian President Vladimir Putin named India among the 3 countries he is in touch with over the Ukraine conflict.
I believe actor nations like China and India have a role to play and must play a role to resolve the conflict in Ukraine. The only thing that cannot happen, gentlemen, is to think that the conflict can be solved by abandoning Ukraine to its fate, because that will not bring peace, it will bring chaos. It will bring wars closer to home, and it will bring many economic consequences, all the more serious than what it costs today to support Ukraine. The choice of supporting Ukraine has been first and foremost a choice of national interest, and it's a choice that won't change.
All right. To discuss more on this, I've been joined by Anil Kumar Trigunayat. He is a former senior diplomat. A very warm welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, sir.
When it comes to the solution of years-long conflict between Russia and Ukraine, India has played a pivotal part. There's no doubt about that. In the beginning, it was unsure that how the response would be, but India never stopped trying, and the results are following. PM Modi visiting Russia, then Poland and Ukraine. After coming from there, he had a telephonic conversation with the Russian president and also with the US president. How do you analyze all this?
I think from the very beginning, India had taken a principled stand.
Yes.
And that was that these conflicts must be resolved through dialogue, diplomacy, and respect for the UN Charter. In the beginning, you know that when there was a grain deal problem in Black Sea, at that time India played a role, and Prime Minister Modi spoke to President Putin, and the Ukrainian grains were allowed to go. Likewise, in Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, when the threat of the nuclear war was expanding, there was once again a discussion to tone it down. And subsequently, in his 3rd term, as soon as Prime Minister Modi took over, he went to G7 summit, as you know, in Italy, Puglia. There he had met Zelensky, he met other leaders, including Meloni of Italy. And this was discussed because this is a very major war that is impacting the whole world, and including India. And therefore, it is, as a principal foreign policy interlocutor, India has been aiming to bring about the peace in the region. And the Prime Minister Modi, after his discussion, obviously he went to Moscow. There he had discussions with Putin, with whom he has a very much trusted partnership. And thereafter, he went to Ukraine again. This became the first Prime Minister to go to Ukraine and to talk to him about the peace. And India, they apparently, the Ukrainian president is not averse to the idea of India holding the peace summit, and is also not averse to the idea of Russia participating. But in the meantime, as you know, that by the Russians has caused some uncertainty in the region. And that's the reason we are hearing that Mr. Doval will now be also visiting Russia. We have an external...
How do you make out of it? What do you make out of it?
Yes. Well, I think these things don't happen overnight. You have to be an interlocutor. We are not becoming a mediator, even though many countries want that to be. But mediator means you have certain things that you can push countries. Here it is taking messages from one to the other and find an area of some kind of a semblance where they can sit together, certain kind of a ceasefire can be achieved, and then they can start talking about the eventual outcome. Now, this is how it's a slow process, but it is a process that can yield dividends over time. You cannot guarantee that, but effort countries like India will have to make, and we are making it, and we can see it on a daily basis. This is going on because after his visit to Kyiv, Prime Minister Modi spoke to both President Biden and President Putin, telling them exactly where it is. So it is an unacceptable situation that is obtaining in the world today with both the wars, both the Middle East as well as the Russia-Ukraine war, which will impinge on our national interests essentially.
Okay. Mr. Trigunayat, you've just mentioned about the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. He'll be traveling to Moscow. Earlier, Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Moscow, and now NSA Ajit Doval. What do you make out of this?
Well, as I said that, these are continuing process. There are inputs that you receive, then those inputs are shared with both sides, then the both sides decide where exactly they are, because currently they have these vertical positions, both of them. With the vertical positions, you can never come to the table. But that's where the art of interlocution arrives, and that's where both the sides. And so Prime Minister Modi and Mr. Doval will also be talking about this. This is one of the issues that will be discussed during Dr. Jaishankar's current visit to Riyadh as well. Because all these countries, Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia and UAE are also playing a major part in exchange of prisoners and things like that between the US and Russia, Ukraine and Russia and all that. So that has all happened. And this is something that we are going to see happening more frequently. And that's why India is a proactive partner. And most of the countries actually, not only Ukraine and Russia, but the fact that most countries expect that India's intervention could perhaps bring peace in the region. And that is what, it's a very, very difficult tall order, I must say, in today's time and age. But all wars must end, and you need some sane foreign policy, which I think India is trying to provide.
Well, definitely, world's great leaders are now accepting the very fact that India is playing a pivotal role when it comes to the solution for this conflict. In a latest, Italian PM Giorgia Meloni is naming India as one of the two countries she mentioned that could play a key role in resolving conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and also with Russian president saying that he is in contact with 3 countries, India being one of them, regarding the Ukraine conflict, and Ukraine also hinting towards peace talks. Do you think a solution is on the way?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, that solution is there because both the countries at the moment, and I think that the solution will be the day the United States also decides that it's time to end the war. But we know that the US elections are also playing on President Zelensky's mind at the moment, and President Putin also. Both countries are stressed. It's not that they are, happily enjoying the fruits of war. No one does. It's a destruction for everybody. And there is a fear psychosis which is playing out in both the countries. And so both have stressed to the limit. And I guess that it is high time that they might be looking for some kind of a face saving. And India could provide that possibly, and a platform for them to talk and arrive at some kind of a modus vivendi.
Definitely. Like you were saying, India has always advocated for dialogue and diplomacy as a solution to this conflict. In fact, Prime Minister Modi urged Zelensky to engage in direct talks with Russia.
Well, I think that they were talking, actually, if you remember that in the few weeks of the war in Istanbul, there were discussions that were happening. And Zelensky had even said that the only red line that Russia had for this was that Ukraine will not join NATO. And there was a statement from President Zelensky at that time. But then the British Prime Minister and the Americans, they wanted to defeat Russia. And that's why we are seeing after 3 years the kind of consequences that the world is facing of this. So India is also the leader of the Global South and the voice of the Global South. So the Global South is the one which is disproportionately suffering from this war. And therefore, India has taken upon itself to act as an interlocutor to bring about some kind of a peace between the two.
Okay, finally, if India plays a successful mediating role in resolving this conflict, how do you think it will shape India's foreign policy moving forward?
Well, India has played this role because we follow a very principled foreign policy. This policy, when we talk of dialogue and diplomacy and the UN Charter, you see our case with China. We have these problems with China since 2020, but we are continuing with the dialogue with them. So
All
it's
right.
not only that we are preaching something else and we are following and practicing something else. It is the same for India. So
Okay.
that's why people believe you when you say something like that. So I think
Okay.
that India's graph is going to be higher.
All right. It was wonderful having this conversation with you, sir. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you, sir.
joining in on the broadcast.
Thank you.